we're going to turn our attention, our focus to Senate District 39, currently occupied by Brian Crane. He is being term limited out, and there are a number of candidates jockeying for his position. I have one of those individuals in studio with me this morning, Amanda Teegarden. Amanda, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Pat. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I thought it was important to bring you on the show. I get requests all the time for the various state seats and state Senate seats, and it's really not of a lot of interest to the whole audience. Why should somebody in Owasso care about this or somebody in Bixby care about it? But this race is a little bit different, and you in particular, because you really are the grassroots. You were the grassroots before we had Rhonda Vallimont Smith, the 912 Project, before we had ROPE, all of that. You're somebody who proves that one person can really make a difference. In fact, I had a conversation with Rhonda Vallimont Smith yesterday, and she told me something I wasn't aware of. She said, you really were the lady that taught her everything she knows. You taught her about the system, how it works, and we need to get people like you, people like Rhonda, down in the state capitol, because just as the party on the national level has been hijacked, I also believe it's been hijacked here at the state level, and we need to bring it back to the people.
Thank you. I agree, and I guess it was this radio station. I was listening to something on the radio about 10 or 12 years ago that actually piqued my interest as a mom and got me started. So I look at that as the epiphany in
right.
the changing point in my life, and it had to do with something to do with education and my kids.
Right.
So that from that point on, my life changed. I became a policy researcher, began to learn how the process works myself.
Right.
And in 2006, we started a small nonprofit called OK Safe, and it was 13 people from across the state of Oklahoma. We began to, at first we did the research, then began to go back and forth to the Capitol to lobby against, advocate for, or against a piece of transportation project that would have been a huge land grab. It was a big project. So that was when my first introduction as to what was happening in the Oklahoma Capitol. I'm a lifelong Republican. I have always voted. I had no idea how the process actually worked
right.
and how government actually appears, how we get the laws on the books,
right.
and it was an eye-opener. It was mostly lobbyists running it. They were kind of surprised when regular citizens started showing up at the Capitol.
Right.
That was shame on us for not having paid attention.
Right.
We've through the years elected consistently pro-life Christians and just kind of assumed that they would get the rest of it right.
Right.
Obviously, we have a much larger government than we did 10 or 12 years ago. I learned that legislative process. I understood how ideas become law. I also began to understand better, which I hadn't been, is what the proper function of government is and how far afield we have come. Through that process, I developed a training class called Citizen Involvement in the Legislative Process, and it was through that we began to train other people. It says go out and make disciples, and so that's the best way to
right.
become more effective. I met a lot of people in this state and out of state. I became a speaker at national conferences across the country. And I've even had the opportunity to speak as a panel discussion on the Real ID Act in Washington, D.C. At the National Press Club. Now, if you'd asked me that years ago when as a mom, do you think you're ever going to go to Washington, D.C. and speak
right.
at the National Press Club, I
right.
would have said you're dreaming. But that's what one person can do right. if you care enough to get involved.
Right. And we had a little conversation off air. I have learned in this election cycle in particular, but I've known it in the past, just because you can run for office doesn't mean you should run for office. And one of the things that you bring to the situation here is that you actually, and I told you, I had a number of candidates come through here who had no business running. They didn't even know the most basic issues that they should be aware of for their office. And I'm not going to name names. People that listen to this program know exactly who I'm talking about. With you, that's not an issue. I know that you're up to speed on everything. There's not going to be a learning curve with you. In fact, you teach people how the system works. So, okay, tell me why you targeted this race. And I'm sure you've had some people out there patronize you by saying, well, why don't you go for state rep first, or maybe something on the school board, or maybe something a little smaller before you take the big bite at the state capitol. Why did you pick this race?
Well, over the years, as I said, I've been traveling the state and advocating for and against legislation and training other people on that. Became a policy analyst. Through those years, I was probably asked to run for office. I did run and file for school board one time, and that was a 24-hour thing, and I changed my mind because I realized that was really not what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I have been asked probably 10 or 12 times to run for office, various offices that opened up. The legislature is where my heart is, and I understand the policy decisions. The Senate is the one that is the most critical, I believe, in this state. The House turns over every 2 years, or is supposed to turn over every 2 years.
I think you're going to have a bigger impact in the Senate than you would in the House.
You do.
Yeah.
The Senate, there's 48 senators and 101 House members. The Senate is supposed to be the longer term because they are supposed to be the more temperate, reasonable House. It's not to say the House is unreasonable, but the Senate is the one that has the institutional memory and can carry forward policies or start to recover from bad policies because you're going to be in there for a longer period of time. So that's the point. It is the more critical House, in my opinion, and I live in this district. I understand it, and I was asked to run for this seat. I prayed about it and thought about it and said, okay, we're going to do this.
You do realize that once you go down there, you're automatically going to be labeled an outsider. You're going to be tagged as a problem child. You're a Jim Bridenstine. You're a Ted Cruz because you're not there to play the game. You're not going down there to enrich yourself. You're going down there to actually represent your constituents. So how are you going to deal with that?
Well, that's not new. You're talking to somebody who actually did live through the 70s. I've never smoked pot, and I've never had a concussion. And I really am not swayed by what popular sentiment is. And either you know what your job is, you know what you're there for, and that's who I am.
Okay.
You don't make decisions based on an emotional response to some sort of a crisis that's happening. Everything has to be reasoned out, understand what the issue is, what the impact is. Are we supposed to be doing this? You have to be the calm, mature voice in the room and not get carried away. And certainly on legislation, not make decisions based on social expediency. You have to be able to keep your eye on the big picture. Where does this fit into the big picture? Is it tied to something that's a bad policy coming out of the federal government? Is this something that we are supposed to be for or against? You have to make those decisions. You cannot make those decisions if you're in the pocket of somebody who's influencing your decision-making process, and you can't do it if you're emotionally involved. You have to be reasonable, dispassionate, and look at it in its context. Is it what we're supposed to be doing with this piece of legislation, and what's the impact?
Now I know why the Southern Poverty Law Center has you on their list, because you're dangerous. You're actually making sense this morning. We can't have somebody like that in the state capitol. Let's talk about two big issues that you're very passionate about: education and healthcare freedom.
Yes, it's kind of education is on everybody's mind. I've knocked a lot of doors in this race. I started campaigning back in August, and you can tell what's on the news based on what people are talking about on the doorstep. Last fall, it was Second Amendment rights. I had that more often than just about anything, and then after a while, it became we're concerned about the refugee resettlement here. And by the way, nobody, no matter what their demographic background was for their Syrian refugees to be placed here for serious safety concerns.
Right.
Most people who know me know that healthcare, fighting Obamacare was one of the key things that we were engaged in the last several years. We fought against the insurance exchange being established here. I actually read the Unaffordable Care Act in its entirety. I read the Early Innovator Grant and said, we can't do this.
Right.
So there's that. Now we've got this huge budget shortfall because we've grown government beyond what its normal, proper boundaries are.
And the growth has taken place under Republican leadership. We need to point that out. You can't blame this one on the Democrats. We've got the Republicans have control of the executive branch, the House, and the Senate, yet government continues to grow.
It does. And it's because, Republicans are supposed to be the ones that take responsibility for their actions. And I believe we're the responsible party. So it is the adult thing to say, this happened under our watch, we need to correct it. On education, we have, of course, I don't know what the thinking was behind committing to a budget based on peak oil price, and that's what we've got right now. So now we've got to make cuts to certain sectors of government. Education is 51%. Common Ed is 51% of the state's total budget. It's in the billions of dollars. That, of course, is where you're going to have to make some cuts. Not as much as people think are going to take place. I think it's probably a good thing that we're having this discussion, and there's more opportunity to actually scrutinize what's happening in Common Ed and start to ask those reasonable questions. Where's the money been going?
Right.
We don't need to raise taxes, in my opinion, although some people are offering to pay more taxes, and you can do that. If you want to pay more taxes, go ahead and write a check. But I don't think that's the proper solution, because we end up in the same boat. It's not going to be enough money, and we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So we need to look at that. Education is critically important. The future of this country is dependent on having a well-educated, well-rounded, well-prepared populace. Mm-hmm. Public education is one avenue. There's other alternatives for education. Parental choice is important in that option. We need to have an opportunity to create, let's get this idea of teachers, the classroom instructors, not actually having enough funds to a proper pay and classroom expenditures. And I like the idea of doing a carve out of that big 51%. Let's create a dedicated funding stream that's transparent. We can actually see this one right here, this line item is for classroom instructors and classroom expenses. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's one line item, Common Ed, 51% of the state budget. They get a check, there it is. They get to decide what's done with the money. And for some reason, there's a choke point. It's not getting to the classroom instructor. So I think this is an opportunity to begin to help them with this. Let's create a dedicated funding stream, get those classroom instructors properly funded, and classroom expenses, and it's a clear single line item, and require the rest of it, the big chunk of money, to be transparent, show all their funding streams, the federal stream of money, state stream of money, and state, and all their expenditures online, visible to everybody, and let's just begin to see. I think that's a very reasonable request of such a big ticket.
Amanda Teegarden, again running for State Senate seat 39, currently occupied by Brian Crane. She's one of, I believe, are there 3 Republicans or 4 total with you?
4.
4, okay. And if people want to find out more about you, your campaign, if they want a lawn sign, if they want to contribute, where do we send them?
AmandaTeegarden.com. That's AmandaTeegarden.com, and it's TeeGarden.com. We are looking for volunteers. We're looking for campaign donations, and we've got plenty of yard signs, and I'd love to stick one in everybody's yard in Senate District 39.
There we go. For those who don't know, where exactly is Senate District 39? What are the boundaries?
On the southern end, it's 101st,
okay,
between Sheridan and Yale. At 81st, it's between Sheridan and Harvard, all the way up to Admiral Place. At 31st, it wings out to the east to Mingo, to Peoria, and then kind of tapers back. So somebody pointed out it's in the shape of a T right up through the middle of Tulsa.
Huh, interesting. All right, we want to talk a little bit about health care freedom. What is that?
That's what like I said, I spent 5 months studying healthcare. Issue was not our primary focus when we were advocating. It wasn't something on my radar. But when Obamacare came up, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, I actually spent 5 months studying healthcare. And in the meantime, I've also become I'm a licensed insurance producer, so I understand it from the insurance perspective as well. I studied that, and I realized a couple of things. Number one, this is unsustainable. You cannot, if we did this, and we did pass it, it's going to be virtually impossible for my kids and your kids to own their own home, because it is completely top-heavy, and it's a fifth of the economy, and that was a true number. It affects every single person and every business. So we've got that. So in the meantime, all right, that system, I believe, is one that's totally controlled, where the government got involved in healthcare and healthcare decisions and payment. So what can we do as an alternative? I'm always looking for ways. What's another way that we can live as basically, remember what it's like to be free? You remember? It's like, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But there are things that you can do that are outside of established systems that are broken.
Right.
And healthcare freedom is one of them. Yeah, I'm a baby boomer. More and more people are anxious to live a healthier lifestyle, be free of pharmaceuticals, and you have to be able to find resources that are, I would say, more natural remedies, or go to a homeopathic doctor, or actually privately pay for your health care.
Okay.
I like the idea of the model of the Oklahoma Surgery Center in Oklahoma City.
Had them on the program a couple of times.
Dr.
Yeah.
Keith Smith,
Right.
that's a fantastic organization. The prices are online. You can see what it is. You can shop. They pay. Right. And he always says, we take cash, credit, or Krugerrands, but they don't take insurance.
Right.
They control their overhead expenses. The doctors own the facility. They have private records, and you go in there, get top-notch care, but
Right.
you pay for it,
Right.
and you leave. And it's still cheaper than
It's a fraction of the cost. A fraction of the cost.
Right. And no, that's the free market. And I kind of like that idea. But it has to be available to people and know that that's an option. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about healthcare freedom. Alternative ways of actually taking care of yourself, protecting your privacy when you go to the doctor, and actually paying for it in a more economical way. That's what I mean. There's other issues, where a lot of people are talking about whether to take the Medicaid expansion, and it comes back down to one thing: how can we afford that? This
Right.
country's $19 trillion in debt, and there's even more triple figures if you look at all the commitments that we
Right.
cannot pay for. There's no money to pay for this unless you continue to raise taxes and lower the standard of living for virtually everybody in order to do something that is a dream.
Right.
It is not.
Well, that's that. You look at the Republicans, and bring Mary Fallon up right now. The one thing they're talking about, they want to put another $1.50 per pack on cigarettes, another $1.50 on a pack of smokes. And when they don't have enough money because they weren't good stewards of the money, what do? They raid the rainy day fund. And that's not what it's for, but they raid that, for money for this project or that project. There is a total lack, and again, in a Republican-led legislature with a Republican governor, of any sort of what do I want to call it, economic restraint.
It's always putting out fires. And again, I think that's indicative of a government that's gotten too big. We're not supposed to be solving every single person's problems out there. That's the hallmark of progressivism. Mm-hmm. Are we supposed to be progressive in our outlook? Mm-hmm. I don't believe that we are. Republicans are supposed to be limited government, and that truly means limited government. Right. That's a much more affordable picture than what we have right now.
Amanda, the clock has got us. Thank you so much for coming in this morning. One more time, if people want to find out more about you, again, we've been talking with Amanda Teegarden. She's running for the State Senate, District 39, currently occupied by Brian Crane. Where do we send them to get more information if they want lawn signs or they want to contribute? AmandaTeegarden.com, and that's Teegarden is TEEGARDEN.com. Would love to hear from you. Yard signs are available. We're looking for campaign donations, as always, and lots of volunteers. And I can't thank you enough for letting me be in here today. Well, thank you for coming on and doing all you've done for us over the years as well.